you need to watch this show. Full tilt, you need to watch this show. Ranker of Kings. If I have built up any goodwill with suggesting to you any media, if I've made you laugh over the years, spend it on watching at least the first 3 episodes of this show. Please. Let's talk about why. This show is called Ranker of Kings and might be the best anime ever made, which is one hell of a bar to hit. Let me talk to you about it in detail. At first, I'll sell it to you the best I can, even though there's already a video probably doing that. And then I want to talk to the people who actually watched such a unique anime, unique experience, unique piece of art. And I promise you, I don't say that lightly, but if you can put up with me for a little bit, I would love to tell you about the wonder that the show has. First things first, this wonderful, warm, beautiful show is as simple as this. This is a show about a prince becoming a king. A prince that by all means is looked down upon, is undermined, is looked as lesser, but holds the most love and the most kingship that anybody could possibly hold. That's about the best I can tell you about the overarching plot. This tiny prince is going to come into power and subvert everybody's expectations, but you are going to fall in love with the people that you at some point hate. This show does the whole friendship is magic thing in a way that is destroys, detonates, just exonerates this idea that this is overplayed and somehow annoying and frustrating at points where everything can be forgiven just because you say you're sorry. No. This show makes you feel love for each one of these characters. Another thing I could throw in there is that it's this king who is deaf, who is tiny, and who everybody looks down upon, but somehow you can feel this love and reverence for him even still. And finally, he finds a shadow being that acts as his as his brother, as a person that believes in him, as a person that constantly pushes him to be more than he can expect himself to be at times. And ultimately a person that just believes in him. And the reason why I have such a hard time explaining the overarching plot of this show is because this show it's like a Game of Thrones, the first couple seasons, of like just beautiful madness of interweaving stories that all matter and that all make you exciting without the like gut-wrenching loss after every season. It's just joyous, it's harmonious, it's peaceful, I have never cried more in any show that I've ever watched than this one. But granted, I usually only cry to shows that I truly find hopeful. I don't really cry for like sorrow because I find it manipulative in nature, especially within storytelling. But I cry a lot in this show when it's someone who's pushing through adversity, who's the love of a mother, the love of a brother, the amazingness and struggle, and somebody pushing forward. It is something that to me always shatters me. You know, if you're the kind of person that when you're watching My Hero Academia or something, when Deku's pushing through adversity and finally makes it out to the other side, this show will make you break in a beautiful way. It doesn't make you feel sad after any episode. It makes you feel connected to these characters because this show does such a good job of showcasing the wonder that exists within the flaws of human beings and how some of the most beautiful emotions that human beings possess can be corroded and corrupted to an extent in which you end up cannibalizing that love for a person. Maybe it's because you want to keep them safe, so then you don't give them any responsibility, you don't believe in them, and furthermore you allow your perspective of them to truly signal to them, even though you care about them, to signify that you don't believe in them and that you don't actually think they have the capacity to succeed. And that can corrode someone's self-identity immensely. One thing that I could tell you, just as like the slightest wave of a spoiler, is this show overarchingly deals with every single trope you've seen in fantasy ever. We have the evil stepmother, we have the kings, we have the kind of King Arthur vibe of like a pure king, we have the idea of a cruel king, of a tyrant, we have the idea of ego, narcissism, we have the idea of the mirror on the wall, we have the idea of a deal with a benevolent power to give you power to become stronger. We have it all. whether that's King Arthur and the sword that lets him have like intense strength. Every trope is here, but done in such a beautiful way to where it maybe, in a lot of cases, subverts your expectation. This show, as a person who is pretty good and has watched shows for a long time, I'm always the kind of person that likes to predict what's going to happen next, and I'm usually right about these kinds of things within shows. But this is a show that I couldn't predict shit. It is that clever in its misdirect, and none of it feels like it's trying to fake you out. It all makes perfect sense. I cannot tell you guys enough to watch this show. It is a beautiful journey that makes you fall in love with these characters harder than I've ever felt anything with a character. It's only 24 episodes, but in those 24 episodes, they make you connect, empathize, understand the multi-layers of these characters. This is a thing I only attributed to Assassination Classroom for that show's skill of being able to unravel characters and make you feel like you truly know them. Like you know what the character will do before it's done, because you know them so deeply, and the author's done such a good job about slowly unraveling the complexity to that character that makes you know them. It's truly a show that I'd bet with all that I am that you'd find love in, that you'd find hope in, that you'd find beauty in, and that you'd find it to be a show that breaks your top 10 at least. Maybe I'm overhyping it, but I'll do it, because to me, I loved this show that much. And if there's a slight chance that me overhyping it could just get your foot in the door and get you into an experience in which I otherwise think that some people wouldn't take. The Ranker of Kings has a very, very strange art style. And as much as people can see, oh, it's a very sweet show and it's gonna be heartwarming, it's so much more than that. But I could see its art style throwing people off to an extent, because it does look kind of strange. You know, you have a person with a giant pointy nose. Boji is drawn kind of childlike, like as if he's kind of like from a children's book essentially that we had when we were younger, kind of like minimal features, but because you can imprint on to some extent. A lot of the design choices are weird. Some things look kind of soft and not as detailed as maybe you see in other shows, but all of it contributes to this idea of like emotional resonance and like a uniqueness of character, and like the tropes that exist within the characters in the show you find to be like silly, and then at the end you're like, no, that's because that's a unique trait within them that I actually love at this point. That's the best sell I can, because now I want to start talking about a little bit. We're gonna go one layer deep into spoilers. Into the reverence and love I have for the show, talking about some of the moments on the surface level for what I think truly made the show amazing. And then I think we'll go bit by bit, slowly, piece by piece, going deeper and deeper into the show. So first things first, watch the show. This is where we're getting into like spoilers. Not too many, but just enough to where you might start taking some surprise and wonder out of the show. So go off, watch it. I would suggest this show more than any show I've ever suggested to you ever. And I say that because this show is so good that I can kind of look past my benevolence and love for the shows that I think are wonderful. Like I love Blood Blockade Battlefront and all these kinds of shows, Welcome to Demon School, Irmika. But those are shows I like because I know that there are things that those shows do that I like. This is a show that does so many things so perfectly well and so beautifully that to me I think it is just a masterpiece. Like truly. And whereas those other shows, I could see other people not liking them because of the things that I like within them that are unique to my likes and interests. This is a show that does too many beautiful, wonderful things that I think resonate on a human level that I can't think of one person who couldn't find wonder and magic and majesty in it. So with that being said, go watch it. Maybe I oversold it too much, but I can't describe how much I loved the experience. And how so many times I cried, and so many times was I just lost in its entrapping beauty, I guess. Now, without further ado, let's get into a little bit of spoiler land. So first things first, one of the things that this show does beautifully is its relationship with the whole friendship is magic / here's a character, here's them being kind of scummy, and then here's the reason why they were scummy, and it's a human reason. It's a thing that we can empathize with. It's a thing we can kind of understand to some extent. Some of them, most of them. The best example of this by far is one of the first ones you'll interact with, and that is the evil stepmother trope. You despise the mom at the beginning because she's just like undermining. She like Boji is a good kid who's trying his heart out, and she just gives off the like evil stepmother vibe. And it's funny because the person that you think, it's so well written, the person that you think is like in his court is his swords master, the one that looks at him with some hope in his eyes, like, it's okay, kiddo, you know, you're doing great. That's the sword master, and then how beautifully that is shown to be like overwritten and like expertly done in such a way that it makes it so that there's reason for why he has benevolence and love in his heart for Boji, but also the reason why he takes it away. Or not, the reason why he takes it away is a little bit of my pet peeve with the show, which I'll talk about. But the mom undermines him, talks about how he's not good enough. And if anyone's coming off the show, you're like with me, like, come on, but I know, but it starts off this way. If you think about it, like at the beginning, and bit by bit, you slowly start to see this woman be kind of more instances of cruel. And it seems like she's the classic stepmother, which is like, this is my stepson, fuck him, I have my real son, I'm gonna give him everything, even though it's against the wishes of the king, because Boss, the fucking badass name of a king, Boss, basically gives Boji the crown as his dying wish. So he dies eventually, we know this in the story, and basically he gives Boji the crown, only for Daida to basically inherit the crown, because the mom basically overrides the king's choice and says Daida should be in power. And granted, well, this is something that we kind of find out later down the line, but this is kind of the beauty in the show, is that at first we're kind of still annoyed with the mom, but there's two moments early on that catch us. And one of those moments where Boji basically, something happens to Boji, and there's this entity that's somehow healing Boji. And you're like, oh, okay, there's some random like witch in the tower that's healed our boy. And they don't show her face, of course, their face. You know what it is. It's a stepmom. But then there's one more instance where, and this is to me the best thing I've ever seen executed, because I was not expecting it, where essentially Boji's like trying to run off and get stronger. He wants to go on an adventure to become better. After a thing happens with him. Anyways, there's this moment where he's trying to rappel down a castle wall out of his room with like sheets and stuff, and eventually his mom finds out that he's like hanging outside of a building, and the voice actor does a great job about being like, oh, she actually sounds worried at first, but still we kind of dislike her, so we're kind of like, fuck her still, she's a piece of shit. Anyways, so and there's like little hints that, oh, maybe she was the one that healed him at this point, but anyways, she gets her guard to start pulling him up. But then Boji kind of fights against this and kind of says like, no, like I don't want to do this. And then of course the rope untethers and he starts to fall. And in that split moment, his stepmom dives out of the window head first, like ready to try to grab him and cradle him and keep him safe. And if it wasn't for her guard, grabbing her at the last minute as she completely dove out of the thing and she's just out of the window and the guard grabbed her foot, she would have plummeted. And she starts freaking out. She rushes down to Boji and like heals him. You know, it's always hilarious because they do so many cool art things where like it's a subvert expectations of like the grand healer of like enchanting in this beautiful way, where the stepmom's like just constantly like, it's awful. It's an awful experience healing somebody. And she's just trying her heart out and she's healing him. But that's one of the moments where like, oh no, this person, and then of course at that point they're like, and let's take a step back. And you see that she totally fell in love with this kid that depended on her, that needed her. She tried her heart out to win his favor and she finally did. And in that she also kind of unlocked, it seemed like to her a part of her like humanity, love, like showing and helping another, whether it's an animal that can't defend itself. Despite all that, she still healed this snake and did this stuff for him. And in that, Boji trusts her, but also I think to her, to an extent, it made her do something that was truly like hopeful and kind. And in Boji, she sees that kind of hopefulness and that kindness, which is beautiful. But anyways, she ends up, you basically get a whole good backstory about like, oh, this person that we kind of wrote off does love him. But there's also this moments where she does, like, her love manifests in such a way that she wants to protect someone that she deems to be weak and frail and needing of protection, like a mother should, kind of. But in that, she also sees the gung-ho nature to Boji, and she kind of says, okay, you're gonna have to go. You can go on this adventure, but I'm gonna send these guards. They're like super powered guards to save you. And on that trip, he takes the swordsman. So now let's start going. We're gonna go deeper into spoilers and kind of recapping stuff because I just want to talk about all of this show. Thank you for putting up with me. Forgive me if this is long, also. But let's go back to the beginning. So first things first, Boji meets this shadow person. It's like, again, the art style in this show is, you'll love it. You'll love it. But at first it's a little weird, which I love weird. So I was actually on board. But if you have a little abrasion there, put through it. It's worth it. So this child Boji, a small kid with a little crown, basically interacts with this little shadow man, and the show gets dark at times. Like, it eventually goes into the backstory that the shadow man went through, and how like kingdoms can get cruel and very, very fucked up very fast. And it's like the show has this air of light and wonder to it, but it doesn't stray away from the darkness of the world, the cruelty of others. Anyways, he meets this shadow. The shadow kind of starts conning him for a little bit, and then whilst the shadow is conning him, he eventually follows Boji back to the prison, or back to the castle. Sorry. Anyways, he follows him back to the kingdom, and he sees that everybody is like laughing at Boji, and everybody is like making fun of him, and everyone always chalks it up to like, oh well, Boji is deaf, and without the sign language, he can't understand people. But very quickly, you find out that Boji can read lips, and he can hear everything that everybody's saying. And nobody knows that, except for Shadow Guy, who puts it together pretty fast. Shout Shadow Guy. Kage. He meets Kage. I should know his name, but it's Kage. He meets Kage, the shadow person. And eventually, he basically finds there's this moment where he's following him, and he sees people making fun of him. He sees how people look down on him, and he's kind of getting pissed. He's kind of like, why is everyone being mean to this fucking kid? We're looking down on him. Anyways, so then eventually you fast forward and you meet his swords master. And basically the king gives the orders to the swords master to basically make it so that Boji can like become strong. So like start training him. We're going to up your training. That's what the king says to the swords master, which is Boji's teacher. Then and this is kind of where the show it makes sense, but it's also kind of like, it's one of the only times in the show where I kind of get lost. I get lost in like the reason for why they did what they did. But basically, the swords master guy seems like he's very annoyed with the fact that he is teaching somebody who would otherwise perceive as inept. Boji can't get stronger. He doesn't seem to be getting better with swordsmanship and stuff like that. But Boji has a brother called Didus. Didus is like a prodigy in every stretch of the word, and he is the queen's son, like real son, not stepson. Didus, who is skilled with a sword, he challenges the grand swords master guy to fight him, and the swords guy wins, but he sees like a shit ton of potential within Didus. And the swords master kind of lights up like a Christmas tree, blushes like, you have the blood of Boss, which is the king, and he has a reverence for Boss. But then what happens next is the problem. Essentially, Boji, seeing his teacher, his master, like fawn over this other student, gets kind of frustrated with like, well, I'm good too. So then he ends up fighting Didus. And this is the thing and also, by the way, Kage is watching this whole thing unravel. And this is where, to me, everyone is going to experience a very, very sharp spike in rage. Because what happens is Boji starts winning. He fights his brother, who's kind of like has this air of arrogance and kind of like a weird prejudice against Boji to some extent. Anyways, he starts fighting his little brother, who he perceives as weak, and his brother Boji starts surprising everybody. Boji is literally not getting hit once within this entire sword fight. He's constantly jumping around, he's like a lightning fast shadow. But every time he impacts with his brother, every time he dodges and then impacts and counter hits, he basically does like nothing. He does no damage. He basically just slaps somebody with a stick. But he's like never running out of energy. He's winning the fight easily. Where he basically and it's funny because his brother has like a bunch of red marks on him, because it's not like you're being hurt, it's just like you're being slapped a bunch with a stick. So his brother is just caked in like a bunch of these red marks. But all the guards are starting to judge Boji for doing like sneaky undermined tactics, because I guess they're used to Boss, which is like this giant who has a club and just fucking obliterates people and like takes damage and then like repays it back. So to see Boji, who's dodging and like counter hitting, to them, they perceive it as like some sort of like assassin, not the swordsmanship of a prince who kind of like reposes attacks and hits back. that kind of thing. Regardless, this is the thing that makes everyone's blood pressure to spike, because the swords master, his master, goes up to Boji and says, basically in sign language, says like a king or a prince doesn't run from a fight, essentially, or something to that effect. So then Boji sits there and is kind of like he's kind of stunned, like, okay, and then Didas, his brother, literally kicks the shit out of him. Like, I think he breaks both of his arms. I think he breaks his legs. He just completely eviscerates him. And everyone's looking at this. And it was clearly like the swordsman told him something, and then the swordsman just letting him get the shit kicked out of him. And then it's kind of nice because eventually, the swordsman guy is just watching a student die. Who was previously winning. And this is where I say the show doesn't make any sense. This is where this is where I showed this moment in the show doesn't make any sense. I think this one is really the only moment in the show which is truly stupid. Because literally, it doesn't make any sense. Why, like, they don't have enough backstory built up to why the swordsman guy is letting his student just get the literal shit annihilated out of him. Maybe he's trying to make it so that, like, he knows his student will never, fight back, like, just give up, essentially. Just give up, stop trying. You can't be anything, so I'm gonna let your brother break you. But to the extent in which he lets him break him is insane. Anyways, and also when he was winning, like, it's just like you had to be the version of what I think is strong in order to do this, despite you already have so many things that are like unfairly given to you. So for me to hold that over you to do that again is just insufferable. Anyways. Eventually, as Boji is like basically broken, and eventually Kage, the shadow, is about to jump in, this other like high profile guardian, let's call them, or like, a guardian, I guess, throws a spear to stop the fight. And there's one redeeming factor in this, which is the spear guy basically is like looking at the swordsman guy like, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you right now. Like, you think you can just let the prince get killed, like beaten to that extent? I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill. And it was like this moment of like, thank you. At least somebody's on his side besides a fucking shadow named Kage, who's like the only one who's not an idiot. And it's fucked up because there is this clear love for Boji, but like in this moment, I guess it's all just like the swordsman guy, I guess, just got like hyped because he had a protege, essentially, that he thought he could foster that specific type of strength that he's aware of. Anyways, long story short, the swordsman person like lets him basically get broken, and then this is a moment that's actually pretty beautiful because eventually, the prince gets wrapped up in a bunch of guards. He has 2 giant casts on. He basically, the people are saying that he'll never be able to pick up a sword again, and maybe that was the extent of the swordsman guy. Is like, I want to make it so that this kid doesn't have to fight anymore. But yeah, you are gonna let him die. Anyways, regardless, we love the spear guy. We love the spear guy here. We hate swordsman guy even now. We still hate him. I still hate him. Anyways, so the swordsman guy shits on his student, lets his student get the shit kicked out of him. That's when we see this relationship between Kage and Boji develop, where basically Kage, the shadow guy, sees Boji, he's like, dude, you were winning. Like, you were doing great. Like, you only started to lose when you listened to that fucking asshole. And then this is the moment which is like gonna make you, it made me tear up like crazy. This is the moment where what do you call it? The shadow guy was like, hey, I believe in you. I bet on you. All right. And it was just like, yes. And then Boji just fucking melts because that's all he's ever wanted in his whole life is for someone to believe in him, to not think he's just like worthless because he's deaf, and doesn't, in part because he's deaf, he can't speak. But yeah, he's not like he's stupid. It's not like he can't do anything. He's actually incredibly skilled. In fact, he was given such a shorthand outside of being deaf, which you learn about later down the line, which I guess is okay to talk about now. But basically, you learn about that Boji's strength was stolen from him by his dad with a contract of a demon deal, essentially. So Boji was given even less of a shorthand, because his dad took his giant strength. But let's start rapidly moving on. Essentially, all what happens next, which is relevant, is basically King dies. Boji wants to go on an adventure to prove himself worthy, because the crown was stolen from him. Essentially, his mom and all the other advisors, including Sword Guy, There's a couple people that fight on behalf of Boji, but everybody else basically throws in the towel to him. They basically say, no, he's not going to be king. So then Boji gets bent out of shape, which he should be, and says, okay, I need to get stronger then. I need to become someone that can prove to all of you that I can do this. And then he falls out the window. And at this point, Kage the Shadow, after telling him that he was going to bet on him and that he was going to stand by his side, kind of disappears. There's a reason for it, but he disappears. Anyways, Boji sets off on this adventure to become strong with the swordsman guy. And with the swordsman guy, he was given orders by the now king, which was Boji's brother, the one who kicks the shit out of him, to basically assassinate his brother because the king is like a tyrant. The little brother, the blonde brother, kind of just an asshole. And like he kind of repents a little bit by getting a shitty hand eventually. He gets punished essentially for having this stupid idea of like, I'm gonna rule through domination and force. And the king commands that a lot of the other servants basically kill each other. Also, he orders Boji's master, the swords master, to kill him. Long story short, Boji gets pushed off of, and there's a lot of like background. This is the kind of show that has like 15 different stories going on at once, doing like backstory, and you love it. I loved it, I should say. But he eventually gets to the point where we're going back to Boji. The swordsman been kind of keeping him safe, but the swordsman also been trying to poison him. He's been trying to kill him. And the thing that makes this even more painful and insufferable is the designers do a really good job. The author, the writer does an incredible job about actually, in this instance, and this kind of throws you for a loop, shows you the reverence and love that the swordsman has towards Boji. So it wasn't like he was always cruel. There's a moment where Boji literally, he looks at Boji and he declares to Boji that he'll keep him safe always. And this happens throughout like all of their life. Like all of these amazing people, these 7 guards, these higher up people, all love Boji. Like he was a kid, he was the prince, he lost his mom, and they all kind of surrogately became his family. Which makes it all the more cruel and painful when this guy takes the orders of this prince, of Didus, and pushes Boji off a cliff, and then subsequently lets his arm get lopped off as a way of repentance for that. This is the only thing, the only flaw I can even slightly spot within the entirety of the show is the swordsman relationship. It doesn't make any sense. Or if it does, it's like one of the few mental disorders that exist within the entire show, because it makes no sense that this guy promised and loved his student so dearly that he just lost it, committed this atrocity because he had orders to do so, but then subsequently immediately lops off his arm, immediately folds, immediately changes his decision. Yeah, it's one of the few times within the entire story that there's ever this character just is the one that doesn't make sense. It's almost like we're missing a piece of him just suffering, him wanting more than anything to have a student to teach. And over the years, that love that he had for Boji corroded into kind of a resentment for the fact that he couldn't teach or pass on his swordsmanship. Because that wasn't made to be, to me at least, apparent. And yeah, the moment where he pushes him off the hill and Boji for the first time ever has this thing. And this is beautifully done in the future. When we catch up to Boji and they meet again, they diverge. Or they come together again. And Boji actually has a genuine fear from this person, rightfully so. He might have changed. He might have tries to atone for the thing that he did. But to Boji, you were the last person on the planet that he ever thought would have betrayed him in that way. And you betrayed him in the biggest way imaginable. And even then, Boji still loves you. He's just terrified of you. That love that he has for you is clearly dangerous. Because you killed him. You were willing to kill him. And if it wasn't for Kage, which in this moment, as he gets assassinated, essentially, Kage comes in and saves Boji. And this brings us on to the second phase of the arc, which is essentially Boji training. Boji training in the motherfucking underworld by one of the generals of the underworld. Oh, I can't remember his name. He's such a weirdo. He's such a goofball. But he's great. Basically, it's like Boji's teacher. Also, the underworld thing, it's awesome because they also show you that Boji was always unbelievably cracked. Because Boji has a perception on the show, at least, where you're thinking oh, he has some skill. But no, he's like overpowered from the cuff, but you just don't ever get to see the extent in which his like movement and dodging is batshit. Like they show you that like clearly a fighter that is on par with the generals, like the swords master, let's say, is he ends up fighting this general that's like the head of the guard in the underworld, and he ends up not getting hit not once. But Boji has no offensive, so Boji can't actually deal damage. And the reason why that is because his dad stole his power from him, so he can't ever grow stronger. Which I'm wondering if in season 2, if they're gonna somehow, like, now that his dad's dead, is his power gonna slowly start trickling back to him? I don't know. Maybe it's just gone forever. Or maybe now his dad's not siphoning it, so maybe now he can start building actual strength. I don't know. Probably not, because that's kind of the point to how what Boji developed in, but it'd be kind of cool to see Boji also have like a be able to flip on a switch and get strength, you know? Anyways, but yeah, long story short, a lot of adventures happen within the underworld. Boji and Kage just grind training, and then Boji gets cracked. We'll talk about it right now. Boji, they give Boji such a cool power, and the structure of power in this show is incredibly good. Like, one of the things is that Boji is basically incredibly fast, and they teach him how to like split atoms almost, or like find the weak point within somebody. So he has the classic like sword that's like the thin, pointy needle sword, because the guy trains him to basically hit weak points and like to deaden nerves. So Boji basically becomes like a non-lethal or very lethal version of like acupuncture, like nerve deadening, that kind of thing. So he's able to like take somebody out without killing them instantly, and like drop people, which is awesome. Anyway, so he gets like really overpowered really fast by being able to like crack into the weak points. But he's not like unrivaled, but he is technically the strongest in the kingdom. Which is hilarious because his dad, who is like known to be like unrivaled boss, is like unrivaled to be the strongest human in the world. But Boji is strong in an entirely different way, but it perfectly counters strength. It doesn't perfectly counter cheating, like rules like immortality, which we find out later down the line. Anyways, so now it's kind of hard to describe everything, but there's like a beautiful, slow, like trickling of information of what essentially is like the evil witch. So Didus, basically, who's the king who was sent assassination people over everybody, basically he gets taken over by, it's so much at this point I'm not even sure if I want to explain all of the intricacies of what goes down, because we know it. It's kind of insane if you think about it, like, oh well, Didus, the brother, gets inhabited by the dad because the dad made a contract, or no, fell in love with, oh no, took responsibility for a witch child who had some of the most nightmarish, horrible shit done to them. So at this point, I'm assuming you watch the show. I'm assuming we've watched it all, okay? So, dude, now let's just talk about the one things, okay? First of all, this show got dark, okay? Real dark, real fast. When they start talking about, like, it first knocks you over the head when it comes to, like, the shadow guy, and then it gets even crazier when it gets to the point where they show you about, like, the ogre, which, by the way, dude, I love so much. Like, what it could basically, Boji comes back into town, he like, neutralizes this giant ogre, and then the ogre pledges his strength towards Boji, and then you find out, like, the most dark backstory about this giant ogre guy, which breaks my heart. Essentially, he had to, like, it's so much there, but basically he had to he was a part of a lot of his people dying in such a way that they shouldn't have died in, because they were just caring about their young children, essentially. It's too kind of crazy to talk about in explicit detail, but you guys know it if you've seen the show. It's depressing and sad, but also it makes me frustrated. This is one of the other, like, slight hiccups that I have with the show, which not so much a hiccup, just so much as it shows the fault of the Underworld King. But the Underworld King basically forces the ogre guy, who he is completely not in the realm of owing anything to. He kind of says, I made a better guard, so now you have to be a part of that guard, because I'll show you that it's better than what we'd had to do back then in the war. And it's like, bitch, are you kidding me? No, he doesn't owe you fucking anything, actually, you cunt. And then he, like, instead of, like, staying with Boji, he's like, no, you're a criminal, you have to come work for our guard. And it's just frustrating. Anyways, so then he's like, okay, I will, I guess. And it's kind of just like, this fucking underworld guy sucks. He's not the worst, but he sucks. And yeah, it's just like one of those things of like, I don't care if you made the underworld better now. I owe you nothing. And you owe me a lot, actually. So like, leave me a fuck alone. And there's like a moment where Boji would have absolutely taken care of him. In fact, Boji stood up for him, completely. And it's just like, Jesus, anyways. It's one of the few other moments where I'm like, it doesn't make sense. The swordsman guy, that to me lacks some reason. But that one just is like, okay, maybe the one underworld guy is kind of a dickhead, like kind of a shitty bastard. Anyways, the only thing I can kind of really talk about at this point is for those of you guys who checked out this because they wanted to talk about the ending, dude, the way it culminates and the way Boji fucking takes down his fucking boss, and they do it in such a way that like shows the vastness of boss, where boss is just like, now that he's in like his other son's body, he has so many buffs, he has like the power of a giant condensed, so he's basically impervious to damage. But yet Boji can still like just slice through that just enough to poke through his weak points and to slowly start bringing him down essentially. And they do it in such a way that like Boji's speed just becomes like the most inhuman. So that like all that referring to about Boji being like a god or being like the strongest out of everybody is completely on display. And it's not a testament to Boji, like Boji's gift. It's a testament to Boji's skill development, like hardening of his upbringing, and like just dedication to like finding a path forward that works for him. And it's beautiful. And then there's so many other things that they do where when the show comes to a conclusion, it feels so good. It feels like everything worked out, but they do such a good job about like seeding a bunch of other things. So first of all, the way that it wraps up, what do you mean by like it feels so good? Well, I was wondering for the longest time, again, misdirects. Also, it's sorry real quick, there's such a cool moment where I think he finally gets to show his mom, like that he's just like, I did it, Mom, I'm a badass, look at me. And his mom looks at him like, yeah, it's my mom. I'm gonna tear up just thinking about it. It's just so cute. And also like so just magical, and throughout so many parts of the show where like finally they get to see Boji become the man that Kage knew he could be. Is wonderful. And to see like the hope and the wonder and the incredibleness that this person sees the world in, Boji, backed by like unrelenting power and force, is just like, put your faith in him, in the same way that people felt the same way about Boss, except Boss is kind of a flawed human being anyway. But yeah. Oh, also about the darkness in the world. Like there's a moment in there that I did not expect it to get this grim, where basically with Moranjo, I can't say the name properly, but yeah, the witch, she had such a, like they did the thing where they made you hate them so much, where like these scumbag people who they tried to help because they were in constant conflict, they were just kind of like built to have like certain values of like cruelty and like self-preservation skills, etc. So even though they were given so much, they still acted kind of scummy. And then just to see the way that they went hard in their cruelty, but it's not like it doesn't make sense. Like I don't think they're like this rival distant land. I could see it being cruel. I could see that's a human thing that people could be, is being excessively cruel in this way. That was terrible to see that like they lopped off her arms and scarred her face and like slaughtered her mother. And then to see that, again, this is what I mean by the show does such a good job about misdirection / subverting expectations / resonating, and it makes sense. So there's a moment where like, again, these people are like begging Boss. Boss basically finds his surrogate kind of daughter / person he's kind of slightly watching over, because he was healed by the woman. He sees her like scarred and just annihilated, and all these other people are kind of just like laughing at him like, yeah, see, they deserved it kind of thing. And then Boss goes on a fucking rampage and destroys the entire city, murders everybody, takes their bodies. But there's a moment where there's like a tiny mom and her child, and she's like keeping her safe, and she's like, please spare my child. And Boss says nope, and just smashes them apart. And the way they sequence this and the way they build to this kind of like rage and like just cruelty, and the way that like they make it so like no, these people were horrible, like this is just disgusting and like horrible people, to where you're like burn it all down kind of thing. And it's also a little morbid but also in that like more like most people who are watching this probably like, I didn't think it was that morbid, or like it was kind of fucked up, but if you think about it, very morbid. But the reason why I don't think we resonated as being morbid is because of what they show afterwards. It's like this harmonious kind of storytelling thing of like the fact that Miranjo, her child body, is basically made of 1,000 other dead children and the villages and the parents and the horrible people's body parts. The fact that she is healed and wearing their flesh is kind of fucking brutal, you know? And the fact that also this child has so much pain that she was willing to commit suicide, and then Boss saves her again, and then eventually they kind of harmonize. It's dark. It's incredibly dark, but it also makes it makes sense for why the witch wants to do what she does, why she did what she did. There's a beautiful use of like the afterlife sequence of being able to see Boji's mom and all that stuff, and her having this forgiveness, but also like pain. Everything is just expertly done. And then also how that she kind of comes back. Like she's not a lost person. She's just kind of, and throughout the whole show, she doesn't seem like she's crueler than anything. She just seems like she has a motivation and something. So I'm not sure about you guys, but I was really like, they do a good job of making you not pass judgment on her. Then once you're just kind of like, what happened? Why? Like Boss doesn't seem like an innately cruel person. He seems like a person who has he's holding like bad choices that he's made. I can't think of what it's called. Anyways, the whole Boss storyline is also really cool because it kind of culminates in like him finding love in this giant person, him having like an actual romantic feeling towards her, like him, like eventually he gets the power that he desired. He has a child and he gains this super overwhelming strength, and then he goes back to this like god level threat, and he nukes him, which also is hilarious because then Boji is stronger than gods, which is wild, at least when it comes to some of those, pound for pound. Anyways, he beats this god, but then he feels nothingness, and it's because it's like the fact that he stole his son's future, he stole his son's power, and his son is literally like a little dollop on the palm of his hand. That they kind of like they came up with some sort of thing where like he was born under a star that makes it so that he can't go stronger, but it's not the case. It's that his dad took his power. He made a deal with the demon that says, you're gonna take the power of your firstborn son. And he did. And then there's so many moments like where like his mom is cradling him, like refusing to keeping him safe as she's just getting barraged. And again, there's moments where like, oh, that's fucked up though, because the witch did that, but the witch is just trying to keep the man that took care of her whole life alive. So again, like there's so many layers to things where it's just human moments, human understandings of things, where like they do such a good job about, it's not that people don't do fucked up things in this world or do wrong things. It's that people do horrible things for the right, in some way, reasons, or at least at least an understandable reason. And like the intricacies of like the underworld rebellion, where like they had to do these horrible things and they all wanted to vomit at their actions, but then they got to a good place, and now it's all stabilized again, and all that. But I will say the ending did have a lot of funny things I was not expecting too much. I wasn't expecting. Like, this is what I mean by the ending is so good, because it gives you so much closure. Boji kicks some ass. He shows everyone he's the king shit. They kind of have this moment where they show that Boji's power is not without exception. Like, it's kind of like the Hunter x Hunter power structure scaling, where some things are like impossibly good against other things, but then other things are terrible. Like Boji's completely at a loss when it comes to a person that can just overheal essentially, and like doesn't die, because he's basically like stuck, and at that point it's just a battle of attrition. But where his dad has like overwhelming strength, can figure it out, but where Boji couldn't. But then Boji can take down the dad with like ease, like without an effort essentially. But anyways, the one thing I wasn't expecting too much, that was kind of a curveball for me, is where, and it kind of is explicit, where, and again, when I'm recounting this, I'm remembering like, oh, his brother initiated a hit on his brother, and And yeah, and also got to ask the guards to get killed. But anyways, I guess they do make a good point of like, no, his brother is like sitting in darkness and like having to think about the past lessons he had and the reverence for his brother and the fact that his brother felt this isolation his whole life, and eventually like corroding, and then also seeing the cruel horror of that happened to this girl that like took care of him and like taught him and etc. But then for him to be like, that's my wife, and then for it to be like, how old is she? This is a weird time in the Giants, and who knows. But geez. But then the way it concluded, let's talk about that. This last thing I'll leave you guys on, despite just saying this show is perfect. Like, even the swordsman thing I can kind of rationalize. Even like the plot lines, like the goblin, like the ogre guy, I could see being a future thread in the future coming into fruition. I do wish the designer did that though. I do hope that the next season 2 has a bunch of like Boji building an army, like building like accruing wonderful people that are like all shapes and sizes, like all kind of races and all prejudiced people, just taking them under his wing and defending them and then believing in the hope and the world that he could build. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the way it ends is interesting because they set up a plot point where Moranjo has to basically cure or find a cure for this demon that every single time he makes a deal with humans seemingly gets more demonic and grotesque. But in him has this like just good kid who just happened to be born into a race of people that have this mutation, a thing that occurs, I guess. We'll find out more about that, I guess, because they kind of teased that. They didn't really develop that all encompassing. Regardless, we're probably going to see that develop in season 2, where Boji starts to adventure and start to build his new kingdom, because that's the way it ends. Like ends. But it also has this arc where his brother, his actual brother, his like brother from the start, Kage, like leaves him, which is kind of like to a surprise to everyone. We're like, wait, like no, you need each other. Like this is not just one or the other kind of thing. You believe in him and he believes in you, and you can take on the world kind of thing. You guys have been through so much. Anyway, so he tries to like live a better life, and then he basically starts to like get shit on by the cruelty of people, ever present. But eventually Boji's like, yeah, I'm not going to be king anymore, because Boji becomes king. It's like a nice little tease, like, hey, see, he did it. But did he really do it? Not exactly. Not in the way that leaves you with hope, wonder, and wanting to charge into another adventure, which basically is that Boji gives the crown to Didus, which he already seen in a moment where Didus has the making of a king already. Like when he drops his ego, he has the amazing kingship essentially. But Boji is kind of like, well, wait, I want to build my own kingdom. And you're like, yes, that is it, boy. And also it's so nice because we watch this journey of Boji rev up and become this great man, to now see him embark into the world and create his own kingdom. But also he doesn't owe the people who look down on him for so many years anything. So I really hope that, and this is the way that I hope with all my heart that the show goes into, but there's clearly in this world, there is like races that are enslaved, there's races that are looked down upon, there's prejudiced, there's evil, and I would love if that was a part of the overarching arc that is season 2, where Boji is adventuring with Kage and maybe the swordsman guy, because they still have to repent. I doubt they're going to leave his side. So if Boji is going place to place, adventuring, finding like settlements, finding like villagers that are kind of separated from things, have conflict, and he basically goes to all of these villages of like these demon-looking people, these Oni-looking people, this city of giants, or not city of giants, this tiny little village of giants, this village of like tiny elves, these village of pixies. If he just keeps exploring along his adventure and making connections through all of these tiny tribes, and then basically says like, I'll build a place for you. Maybe there's a horrible instance where he says, no, I'm done exploring. These people need me. I'm going to build my kingdom right here. And then hopefully he finds some like assets from each one of the villages along his journey that like help him somehow have magic that can like craft grand structures, because that'd be fucking huge. Also, if Boji is able to find the potential that lies within others, and like truly like values the incredibleness that maybe is overlooked by certain military ego, all of these things, instead of like, you know, utilizing races and being prejudiced, instead of he's used as like a culmination of all of these wonderful aspects of all of these people melded into a soup, and that is his kingdom. I would love if that was season 2. And then previously throughout that entire journey, I'm sure we'll see him, like we'll jump back to the kingdom, we'll see his mom, we'll see Didas, we'll see the various kind of things that they're having to deal with. Maybe there's a slight conflict within the war of that. Maybe there's the swordsman guy that they have to deal with. That's Didas' problem now because he's hucked in one of their lakes. You know, that could develop. There's also this overarching, there's so many threads to follow within season 2, which is expertly done because you feel so satisfied with the conclusion, but you're also so hopeful and interested for the future. Like there's the Moranjo has to save the demon kid. There's the immortal swordsman guy who needs to become not immortal anymore. There is Boji creating his kingdom and going on adventures, and then I hope creating his kingdom. There's the settlement of these gods, these like power hungry gods that are like in the world and clearly are in places of kingship, that Boji's probably gonna have to fight. There's also these threads of the Ranker of Kings, and what does that mean? Why? What happened to the underworld guy? Why? What is that? What is that all about? Why is this Ranker of Kings seemingly more of a curse and more of like a balancing act than anything else? And there's a lot of reference to like the king that went insane seemingly was one at one point number 1 king, or ranker of the kings in the first place, who took the mantle of, yes, let me look into the eye of the abyss and see what looks back kind of thing. And it seems like they all go crazy or they all go into madness. And I think, you know, the way the guy said it, with the ranker of kings being the overarching kind of thread at this, seemed like he was saying, oh, like this is an equilibrium. Like if you ever accept like grand power, you're not worthy of power. That kind of seems like the idea. So if you were ever in a position where you were unequivocally number 1 and you always deny like the prospect of more power, because it's just like, it kind of makes sense if that is the true sin of kings, is the constant gluttony, the constantly devouring of more and wanting more and nothing being good enough and having it all, you know, not being able to chew through. Sometimes you don't get it all. Sometimes you have bad things happen and you have to just deal with that. And Boji, I think, knows that better than anybody, but I like that Boji never stops putting his effort, his time, his body, his sanity, his life on the line for a future that he would like. Rather than just saying, give me that, I deserve it, he says, I'm going to make a good ending happen because I make it happen. And that hope and that courage, I think, is the thing that the show kind of culminates around, is that wonder and belief in the future, given to this little child, essentially, this kid who charges forward and who is the strongest goddamn person in the whole planet, it seems like, within a certain barometer of spec, which hopefully he gets stronger in different ways. That would be really cool. But ladies and gentlemen, this show is happily very successful. I think successful to the point in which it is greenlit on another season, and it has such a unique art style and sense that I think it's going to become a classic, and I think it's going to be beloved by so many people, including myself. I think there's a high probability that we will get a season 2. The thing that sucks with the show, though, if people who did watch this, because I maybe put season 2 news in the thing, I'm sorry to hold it to the last minute there. Probably put a little timestamp that said we'll talk about this at the end. But basically, there is some news for there being a season 2, or at least not news, sorry, but there is a kind of a sense where the show was successful and popular enough to where I think it would warrant a season 2, but there's not enough volumes currently written about the show. So there's not enough manga, essentially. So a person did the math on like the rate in which the author is able to produce manga drafts, and basically worked up to the point of like, there's a high probability that if we're gonna, and this is rarely how it works, that as soon as the manga has enough copies, we're immediately getting a season 2, which the guy did the math and it'd be at least 2023 or 2024. A higher probability on like late 2024, but even that's being really generous, because the odds of somebody like, they might have a contract like ready to sign, so as soon as the guy is finished writing that amount of work, or even they start developing the episodes as soon as as the person's almost done, then maybe that could be 2024. I would expect that could be something, but I would probably bet if there was not a lot of contract negotiation stuff, that 2025, which is quite a ways away. in order to get a season 2, but I kind of get it if it was. I want the author to take time because he is, I don't think there's a person who I've found who is, it seems like unmatched. Like the amount of threads coming together, the amount of like harmony introduced, the amount of resonance within emotion, the amount of like character depth being shown in its entirety, the amount of like interest in like so many plot threads still just trickled throughout, but yet being able to make a conclusive, solid ending to where you're just like, oh, it's such a good experience. And again, this is why I think the show might be one of the best shows ever created. And I know I don't say that lightly, by the way. I tend to overthink the quality of shows, etc. But to me, this show did things that I can't even describe. Like I can't even, the way it made me feel, the way it executed certain things, the way it had hope, the way it had wonder, the way I fell in love with this character that was just, you know, a goofball essentially. And I just have so much reverence and love in my heart for all of them. The stepmom, I think, is just wonderful. I think the brother, I can't wait to see how he redeems himself fully. I can't wait to see how the witch and Miranjo kind of harmonize their past, or they're one person, how they harmonize their past. I can't wait to see how Boji measures up in the king rankings, even though it's kind of already prophesized that he's the number one, but maybe the first number one to not take the boon of it all. And I can't wait. I can't wait to see it. I trust in the person who wrote the story to just knock it out of the park again. If I got half of what I got this time, I still think it would be an absolute must-watch. Thank you so much for your time, ladies and gentlemen. If you like hearing me talk about anime, consider subscribing, and if that's too much, maybe even just liking the video would do wonders. Thank you kindly for your time. Let me know if you resonated with the show so much as me, as much as me, and if not, let me know why. Because to me, maybe it was just me. But I don't think it's possible that that's the case because of how wonderful this show is. And I think it's just such a shame that I think it has the idea of being maybe overlooked to some extent. But ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think. Thank you for your time. Hope I can see you again, and goodbye.